Christina, thank you for being here. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jamie. So my name is Christina Frangione. I'm a registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and registered yoga teacher in Long Island, New York. And I think that's all.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to get into this conversation. As you know, and have watched those other videos, what I'd like to talk about is the one thing that you feel has helped you the most in your recovery, something when looking back, maybe a pivotal moment or something that just comes to mind when you think about your recovery journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so as we talked before, like this is a really hard question when you come and think of the one thing. And I think it's not even one thing that was like, oh, that changed everything as far as making the decision to kind of choose recovery and that one point. It's more so like why keep choosing it and get to a place where it's like, this is what I'm doing. This is not even, there's no kind of going back from that. Right. And I think that one of the things that was really helpful was turning things from this is just something that's like happening to me. So I'm going through the eating disorder, I'm going through treatment, I'm going through all this, versus this is something that I'm actively participating in. I'm asking questions. I'm saying, I don't like this. I do like this. This is working for me. This is not working for me. And I think just overall, like getting to a place of, finding a voice was really helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you said, so there's a few things you said that I'd like to ask you a little bit more about. So you said it's like many different moments coming together. So it's not just one moment. And of course, there's so many things that go into it. And you said, I quote, so why I keep choosing it. So you had like a moment of why you just like when you decided to choose recovery and continue to choose recovery and remind yourself. So it's not just this definitive moment of now I'm choosing recovery, but it's maybe a little bit of clarity or something that you took away that you were able to keep bringing yourself back to it to remind yourself of doing so. Is there any way in which, to kind of just dive into that a little bit more? Was there anything you did to help bring you back to that like compass, that choice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that it becomes, so I don't know, like exactly, it's honestly been so long, like when I kind of started making that choice, but for me, it was always like, let me try this. And if I absolutely hate it, I don't have to keep doing it. Yeah. But it gets to a point where, okay, I'm trying, doing what I have to do, not using behaviors, whatever, like trying new things. And I guess it wasn't that bad, it wasn't terrible. So I didn't feel like, okay, I'm totally giving up on this. Like there were actually some good parts about it. And then eventually it doesn't even become like, weighing like, is it good, is it bad anymore? It just becomes like, oh, okay, like this is so much better than it used to be, slowly kind of day by day, week by week, moment to moment. And eventually you look back and you're like, oh, okay, like I'm so glad I, made that choice, because now looking at, where I am now or even years ago, along the journey, like looking back on that, like thank goodness I made that choice, that I just wasn't going to live like that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is such an important topic when you're talking about just making, like you weren't deciding the choices in the future. You were deciding in that moment, like what is something I can do, and taking that first, or taking those steps, taking those little steps to get uncomfortable, to see what it's like, and to continue to do so, and to find out like what is there for you when you're doing that. And it's kind of describing it a little bit like almost like experimental. Like I can do this scary thing, see what it's like, and I can always go back. Right? Was that view kind of helpful for you? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there was actually this therapist at one of the programs, the day programs I was at, who at a meal would, if you were struggling with the meal, she would always be like, I'm not taking your eating disorder away from you, or we're not trying to do that. by you eating this, and you eating this meal is not taking that away from you. And that was just really powerful. Like, just because you are going through the motions, you're choosing, you know, to do things that are helpful for you, like, it doesn't mean that you're losing something that obviously has such an important role in your life. It's such an important coping mechanism. It really helped. And I'm speaking very generally, obviously.
Right.
You know, I could mean to myself, but it feels even weird to like talk about myself in the eating disorder sense. So,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, so the behaviors and the eating disorder itself just has such an important role that it does feel like, oh my gosh, someone's gonna, you know, take this all away at once, versus
Right.
I'm gonna learn how to manage without it, and slowly we're gonna work away from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're speaking in these terms of like, I think that is super helpful, because I think it's either, you know, to make it less black and white, it's recovery or the eating disorder, or, you know, my eating disorder or this clinician, or, you know, it's just, I think that does create a lot of like fear, or yeah, it did. That's a really good way of describing it. And to kind of dive into that. So you're talking about, you know, finding your voice and finding your choice. So tell me a little bit about how like that transitioned, or how you feel like that that relationship with that changed from this is happening to me to the to how did that change?
Yeah, so I think part of it too was my age at the time. So it's really, really hard when you are, you know, a young teen, child, whatever you are, to be able to say, hey, mom, dad, parent, guardian, whatever, treatment team, like, I'm feeling this way and this is what I'm advocating for myself for. I really need this approach and I need this. Like, that's super hard, and that's
Yeah.
amazing if someone can do that. But that was not at all where I was at. So part of it too was just kind of getting older and knowing a little bit more about life in general, kind of the way things worked, what I was wanting, needing. So that was kind of a natural progression, but it also was like, okay, wait, I don't like what is happening to me, because these people are making these really shitty decisions and like they don't know any better. But I actually know better, because I've done my research. I've been through it. I know a little bit. So it would make sense. Maybe I should actually say something. Maybe I should say, oh, okay, that wasn't working. Maybe I need something different. And kind of realizing that becomes like, oh, all right, even though I don't want to, I guess I should, you know, say something and just like ask for what I'm needing, which obviously is so hard,
Yeah.
to ask for what you're needing, or even to know what you're needing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so you were advocating for yourself, and I think it's hard to advocate for yourself when I think it's confusing. You know, like you said, you're trying to figure out what you need. You're trying to figure this out. So it's hard to ask for something you don't know you need, but that's it. It sounds like that's was an empowering part of your journey. You mentioned, so before we started recording here, you mentioned an excerpt of a book,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it would be a helpful resource for clients if we can talk a little bit on that passage in particular. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so that book is called Eating in the Light of the Moon by Anita Johnston. And interestingly enough, so chapter 3, I believe it is, talks about this concept of the Emperor's New Clothes. So that's a Hans Christian Andersen story. If most people would probably be familiar with it, at least in the US. And what it is there's this one person who kind of is able to see the truth, and everybody else is just going along with what everybody else is talking about and thinking, because they all want to fit in. And this one person is like, wait, I don't see what everybody else is seeing. So what the passage talks about is how sometimes when people are younger, they're kind of just seeing things as they are, and they learn over time that they're shut down. You know, if they see that there's an injustice somewhere, or there's something that's not right according to their values, but people shut that down. They're like, no, that's just the way things are. That's not how we do it. We don't talk about that. And then that feeling of, I'm not allowed to express myself, I'm not allowed to be who I am or say what I feel or what I see, just gets really stuffed down. And that can cause some of those disordered thoughts, behaviors, even not related to food, but in this context
Yeah.
related to food. So I think by realizing that and then working through that, so that when you do see things and or you're feeling things, instead of being like, oh no, I'm not allowed to talk about that, I'm not allowed to, we don't do that, I want to fit in, and just expressing kind of who you are and what you're about.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's fantastic. I mean, speaking to your, you're talking a lot about finding your voice, but also finding your truth, exploring your values, and getting in touch with that your authentic self. That's in like kind of coming home to yourself or learning more about yourself. I think that's awesome. And so I'll link that book in the notes so people can access that. I have never read it myself, but I've heard so many wonderful things about it. I know people speak really highly of it. I often use the passage in there that talks about how so it's using the metaphor that the eating, like if you are in the water and the log is the eating disorder and you are like on the log, and how when you are like in recovery, how you might swim a little bit away from the log and you can always come back to the log, and then you swim a little bit further, see how far you can swim. Maybe you're going around the log, but you can always come back until you don't need the log anymore. And I bring that up all the time because I think that's a really helpful metaphor too. So I will link
That's
that.
actually the same chapter, interestingly
Oh,
enough.
really?
So I was going to mention that one also.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing too. It's not about we're taking this log away from you that's helping you float. We're going to teach you how to manage without that, with other tools.
Yeah, it's kind of like how it's experimental. It's something you can go back to, which I think it's also important to recognize that log helped you swim, it helped you stay afloat. It's not, it's something, and that's why it's so hard to recover from, because it's a helpful, it at one point or at many points it served a purpose that helped you. So rather than shaming the eating disorder, it just really kind of showing it some compassion and understanding it, and understanding that it has helped. So the last thing I just want to touch on that you mentioned is, you said, and I know we're coming up on time here, past time, but you said how, and I think this is really important to note, like with recovery being a destination, right? Like being viewed as a destination, I think that's harmful in ways. Even though I speak to it too as kind of this destination, something like what we want recovery to look like. And it's helpful while also noting that, you said, well, you were doing things and then it just became your new normal. Anything to add to that? Because I really liked that.
Yeah, so I don't know that I'm gonna kind of elaborate on what you were thinking about that.
Yeah.
So maybe you can share kind of what your thoughts specifically were on that. But I guess it just becomes like such like a non-even issue. Like if I wasn't working in the fields and talking about eating disorders all the time, I feel like it would just be such a non-thing. To even be thinking about, or to remember. So even when I was saying before, like it's really weird even to put myself in that context of when I was kind of talking very broadly about eating disorders and how it's like relates to people and how they hold on to and let go of it. It just very much feels like I'm talking about it in a very clinical, outside of my experience kind of sense. Right. And I think that's also really healthy to not hold on to the identity of, I'm the one with the eating disorder and that's what makes me special. Like I wouldn't even bring that up on like a top 100 interesting things about myself. It's just such like it's just, I don't know. I guess that's kind of my immediate thought on that.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot. So yes, to that point of it just becoming like, just like you said, a new normal, something that's very comfortable, something that, and I think that's very helpful to note. I feel the same way about my recovery of just, it can become this we don't think about it. If I wasn't talking about it as well, it would be, like you said, a non-issue. And I think that's important for people to know too, because I think people can hear that it's something you'll struggle with forever. And mental health and taking care of your mental health and having emotional hygiene and taking care of that and self-care, yes, that's something that will be a forever and should be a forever for everyone. But the eating disorder can be part of your very, distant past, for sure. And I think that is a very good thing for people to hear. So thank you for that. And then the other thing I was touching on too is just, and we've touched on this in other videos, but I think that, where I think it can be harmful to think I have to get to this place, rather than thinking as on your recovery journey of, what can I do now? Because when you keep thinking, well, what can I do now? What am I comfortable with? Where can I get a little bit uncomfortable now and do things a little bit differently, and break it into chunks like that, because that's how you reach recovery is by all of those little things that add up, which I think is helpful. So that's what I was speaking to as far as that goes. Yeah. So thank you so much, Christina. I'll go ahead and these can be so long because I can talk about this forever, and I know you can too. So I'll go ahead and wrap it up, but is there anything else you'd like to add before we end here?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was super helpful. I think people will have a lot to take away with this, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.